It may come as a big shock to people, but in 1850, the only kind of corporations there were companies that were given special charters by sovereign governments. And those companies that had a charter were then obligated to those sovereign governments to provide good service to a standard, okay? And that's how they got the little seal of approval. They had agreed to provide services of a certain standard, not only to the government, but to the people at large. That's what the way of the world was in 1850. Between then and now, we have seen this vast proliferation of incorporated everything. We have seen every kind of corporation you could imagine pop up. We have state-of-state incorporations, okay? And all of this has happened in the past 150 years. It all started in the 1860s, when Queen Victoria lost her husband and lost her mind and came under the influence of a Chancellor of the Exchequer, the chief banker, Benjamin Disraeli, who said, oh, well, you just enfranchise all these people as shareholders and latch onto their labor and onto their bodies and onto whatever they own and their land rights. And then you use all the profit you made on that to hire mercenaries to go to India and racketeer over there. And that is what the British Raj was, and that's what they've been doing ever since. They've been going into countries, and they have been, quote unquote, voluntarily enfranchising voters who are then identified as shareholders, and they steal absolutely everything attached to your name, and then they profit from this tremendously. This gives them huge assets and profits that they can put on the books and borrow against. And so they do, and they go out and they oppress another country, and they take all those people in, and they steal all the assets that they had, the value of their labor, their natural resources, and they put that on the books, and that gives them something more to borrow against. And they pretend that this is all conscious, and this is all something that's known to the victims, and they just misrepresent the hell out of the whole thing. And then they come back and they whip and beat and enslave and harm the people that have paid for all this, and they keep the profits for themselves. And this is the kind of game that's been going on for 150 years, using these corporations and the quote-unquote legal system. I call it legal falsification system, to pull off all of this stuff. They've established the equivalent of the British Raj in India in every country, and it's all illegal occupation. And their excuse has been the same. Oh, we don't know where the lawful government went. It vanished in the midst of our most recent illegal commercial conflict. We lost sight of the lawful government. They must not be here anymore. Well, we'll just take a custodial interest, and we will pay the defense costs of these countries until they get organized again and their lawful government comes back into session. That is how we wound up spending so much money on 950 different military bases throughout the world. This is how we got stuck with the cost of defending 96% of the cost of defending Europe, Iraq, Libya, all these places that had been conquered by these mercenary forces that we didn't even know were mercenary forces. As if this were part of our defense, when in fact they haven't defended us at all. All they've done is use us as the cows to pay and bleed for all of this, while the profit was going to Rome and London. And so, now that this is fully exposed, and so is the illegal occupation of our country and the 17 countries of Western Europe that are still occupied from World War II, and Japan, and parts of the Mideast. Iraq is still occupied, Libya is still occupied, all sorts of different countries have been overrun and are still occupied either directly or by puppet governments that were set up by the same no-goodniks that did all of this. And if we were to sit around waiting for all 3,125 counties to be fully populated again before we could take action in international jurisdiction, well, let's put it this way. Everything that you ever hoped for, dreamed of, wanted, or were owed would be gone. Okay? Because the banks and the pigs, the robber barons, were that close to making it work anyhow. They were going to set themselves up with a whole new kind of slave with no rights at all, based on redefining people as genetically modified organisms and relabeling them as transhumans. And transhumans, guess what? Have no human rights, and they have no necessary civil rights, which were only privileges anyway. So wake up. We have been the object of a long-term, multi-generational legal scheme to redefine us and to steal everything that we possess. Now, I don't know why this has not really come home to people, but when I'm describing these certificates, a certificate is a receipt for property which has been deposited in a trust depository company, DTC. Okay? So someone picked you up, seized upon you, latched upon your name and your person, and trafficked you over into this bank, essentially a securities bank, and dumped you in as a deposit and gave you a certificate so that you could, in theory, come reclaim your stuff. But then they never told you a thing about it, did they? Well, we're at the beginning of the end of a long road home. And taking their paychecks from our pockets while they were doing this to us. They've been using their kinds of money and ignoring ours because they've been rat-holing all our gold and silver as assets for them to borrow against. They've also been rat-holing the value of our labor, the value of our land, and the value of our cash assets. And that's what they use to issue United States dollars, and that's what they use to issue Federal Reserve notes. They use your assets to issue their money, which they then require you to work for and earn. And if this suddenly doesn't make sense to you, it shouldn't. This is the biggest fraud in history. So they've used your assets and indebted your assets for them to borrow against. And then they go bankrupt and they claim bankruptcy protection under your public umbrella. They pass on the losses to you and keep the profits for themselves. Never vote in their elections again. Because when you register, there's that word again, when you register to vote, you voluntarily become a shareholder in their bankrupt corporation and have to pay its debts. This is another way that they contract with you in an undisclosed fashion and get you on the hook to pay their debts. Never, ever, ever register anything voluntarily at all. Always do it under duress. Always do it with prejudice. Always, always fight having to register anything at all, because when you register things, you're giving up an ownership interest. And it's an unearned, inequitable ownership interest. And this is what these people are always trying to wheedle around and get. You can conduct commerce from either the land or the sea. Now, land jurisdiction commerce is just called commerce. If it's commerce on the sea, it's called maritime commerce.